Welcome, and thank you for joining the channel. I hope you enjoy these 3 creepypastas about cryptids, accompanied by rain and thunder. Please help this channel by liking and subscribing. We really appreciate it. There are no ads on this video, and if you have any stories you would like me to share on this channel, comment below and your story will be featured in a video. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy. I don't know his name, I don't know his age, I don't know where he lives, and I certainly don't know how to find him. All that I know is that he's dangerous, and he's on the move. I'm a government employee. I work in a research lab that develops experimental weaponry, primarily of the biological variety. I don't want to say much more than that, as this is already a massive risk of exposing my identity, but I will say that I'm not exactly an intern. I've seen things, I've studied things, and I've created things. I created him. Or, better put, I recreated him. Confused, I don't blame you. If you're reading this, then you're well aware of the concept of legends and mythologically. Things that feed on our collective imaginations to grow more powerful. That live on our tongues as we utter their names and speak their stories, growing and evolving until they become a force of their own, unstoppable, unforgettable. The man with the red notepad is one of them. I'm not positive, but I think his legend began in an email chain from the late 90s. You know the type. Forward this to 20 people in the next hour, or some asshole is going to hack you to pieces with an axe. Except his went a little differently. In his, he would find his victims and draw them. Sometimes he would draw them drowning to death. Other times he would draw them wasting away in a hospital bed. Or most of the time, he would draw them being cut open and pulled apart. It was a coin toss what version of the internet myth you'd encounter. But all of them had one thing in common. He would draw you, and you would die. The thing about the man, though, was that his sketches were thorough. It wasn't enough to simply make a stick figure labeled Sally and have the stick figure being impaled by a flagpole. No. In his sketches, Sally was a detailed work of art, with immaculate shading and perfect lines. There were exceptions to the rule, of course. Wrinkles, makeup, long hair, short hair. Things that would naturally change over the course of a lifetime. These never needed to be exact. As long as the core of the individual was on display, his nightmare worked its magic. As such, his sketches would take hours. Sometimes they would take days. It was only after he was finished with his sketches and signed them with his messy initials that the death sentence would trigger. When I received the assignment, I laughed. Give life to a legend? I remember saying to my boss, "You know April Fool's was 6 months ago, right?" She wasn't laughing though. I remember the way she took a deep breath, straightened her blouse, and sat down on the chair across from me. I remember the steeple of her fingers, the nervous twitch at the corner of her mouth, the smell of cheap coffee gently streaming on the table between us. "Fear," she said carefully. "Fear is a weapon more powerful than bullets and bombs. We need that right now." That was 6 years ago. I've grown since then, mentally and physically. So as the man, he started life in a test tube, shapeless and helpless. Before long, though, he was walking, talking, and after not much longer than that, he was killing. At first it was prisoners. People we'd pulled from black sites. We'd sit both of them in a lab we called the Red Room, the prisoner chained, and the man behind a plexiglass divider. He'd draw them, and they would die. Sometimes they'd catch fire, other times they'd break out in hives, scratch their own skin bloody, and flail themselves alive. Always, though, they would die. Needless to say, we didn't permit him his notepad when the experiments weren't running. In the time between, he'd sit alone in his small cell, hunched over in the corner with his head down. I suppose I couldn't blame him. With only a thin mattress, a bowl to shit and piss in, and 2 meals a day, there wasn't much else for him to do. We kept cameras pointed at him, monitoring the man at all times. We even made sure to cycle the guards, on the off chance he'd managed to coax one into becoming sympathetic. Hell, thanks to some clever genetic work on the part of my science team, he rarely even needed showers, so he was virtually always under lock and key. We took steps, is what I'm saying. We covered our bases. Despite it all, though, he escaped. I got the call last week, and when my boss broke the news, at first I called bullshit. It wasn't possible. Nobody escaped from the facility. Hell, I remember the day it first opened, when I was still a young woman with stars and stripes in my eyes and fantasies of helping my country defeat the bad guys. I remembered the contractor who overseen the construction, a round and hairy guy with breath like garlic, sausage, and fingers to match. He called the facility state-of-the-art, proudly boasting that Sherlock fucking Holmes couldn't break out of there. And yet the man was gone. Not only was he gone, but he had left a bloodbath in his wake. All in all, there were over 10 security personnel dead. One of the guards found outside the man's cell, her skull cracked open and brain matter gently oozing from the fracture. Another was found in the camera control room, a bottle of Drano at his side and vomit covering his chest. Another was a personal friend and head of the overnight guard detail. He was found draped over the woman who ran the front desk, a bullet in both of their brains. It was horrifying, and the words can't even explain it. How could this happen? The man's cell was entirely enclosed and didn't allow him to see any of our personnel. The most they had was a tiny slot on the bottom we passed food through and he passed his shit and piss through. Each week, we'd retrieve him for our experiments. We'd even dispatch personnel to scrub the room and ensure he wasn't drawing on any of the surfaces. Of course, we tried consulting the camera footage, but the man's camera had been disabled during his escape. There was nothing. He was just gone. After a few hours, I got a call from the IT department. They'd been going back through old footage of the man, trying to determine if there was some sort of hint of what was to come. Something that might indicate exactly what happened. They showed me footage of the man in his cell, and it looked like the same routine I'd seen 1,000 times before. He sat in the far corner with his head down, silently waiting for his next meal or bowel movement. There was the sound of the latch opening, followed by a woman's voice calling the man to supper. And then a covered plate of food slid across the floor. The man shifted, getting up and retrieved the plate, and when he did, I saw it. A tapestry of red was written upon his flesh, detailed and intricate. Markings covering his stomach that looked to be carved at the edge of a fingernail. He quickly readjusted his shirt, taking care to tuck into his waistband. My jaw dropped in stunned silence. "Can you replay the footage with his shirt up?" I said quietly, "but take a still capture and zoom in." The IT tech nodded and did so. That's when it all came together. The markings in the man's flesh were his escape plan. His sketches, each one an immaculate carving of the facility's guards. Each one a piece of the puzzle. One showed a guard unlocking the man's cell, then caving her own skull in with a heavy steel door. Another had a guard disabling the cameras, then swallowing drain cleaner. The last sketch was of the man I knew, the head of the nighttime guard detail. It pictured him shooting and killing 7 other security personnel, then turning his sidearm on himself. There was also another sketch. I recognized that face as well, and my heart sank momentarily before realizing the subject of the sketch was still alive. She was a secretary in our archives, a young woman who had tragically lost her arm in a traffic collision 2 months ago. She hadn't been back to work yet, but it pictured her burning down the archives and all the local research we had on the man before walking into the flames herself. In the man's flesh, though, she still had 2 arms. My mind turned, and I realized how the man had pulled it all off. It was in the time between experiments. It was during the walks we'd take to the Red Room. While he made his way along the corridors in chains, he'd catalog features. He'd store them away in his memory, taking care to notice small details of our schedules. He'd grown up here. After all, spent years in the facility. He had plenty of time to grow familiar. At first, my boss refused to believe it. She argued that he'd never indicated any such capability in the email chains we'd pulled from his legend before, that he'd always needed his red notepad, and once he had it, he needed his subjects present to sketch them. It was, of course, our mistake to forget that legends evolve. Now that mistake has cost people their lives. I see it in news reports. They're easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking for, but I know that the man is on the move, and he's killing again. The facility and the government refuse to comment on it. They refuse to clean up about the things we're doing and the danger the public is in. My boss died 2 days ago. A day before that, I remember a member of my research team passed away. The day before that, the other 2 members died. I'd probably be dead myself if I hadn't seen the writings on the wall and taken one of my own fingers off. So now, I'm taking matters into my own hands. I'm raising the alarm to you, the public. The man with the red notepad is out there. He may be sketching you. You may not even see him doing it. Maybe he'll just say hello to you in passing. Maybe he'll just take a memory. But if you do catch somebody looking at you a little too carefully, or glancing your way before putting a pen to paper, then it's time to run. It's time to run and maybe leave a finger behind for good measure. This happened over a year ago. I'm 30. I was sleeping in my living room on the couch when I suddenly woke up to the feeling that something is wrong. The creepiest part of the story is it was exactly 3 a.m. when I woke up. Not 3:01, but exactly 3 a.m. I instinctively looked up at the wall, and there's this freakishly big daddy long leg, and it looks like it's looking right at me. The thing was bigger than a fucking dinner plate. If I were to guess, it was probably 2 feet from one end of its legs to the other. I jumped off the couch and watched it. It must have noticed I was aware of it because it made a U-turn and started slowly making its way back towards the TV in the corner of the room. It could barely hold itself on the wall. It was so big. It's like It was too big for its own good. Its body was really thick for a daddy long leg, probably an inch across, which is gigantic for a daddy long leg, apparently. This shit was in my house too, and I didn't squish it for the same stupid reason. Some people probably think I'm over exaggerating its size, but I watched it for a minute. It climbed back behind the TV, and I thought I'll deal with it in the morning. Not like something that big could easily hide. I slept in my room for the rest of the night, but I never seen that spider again. I can't imagine where it could have gone because it was so big. I looked up on the internet to see how big they actually get and couldn't find a picture of that one that was as big one as I saw. Apparently they only get really big in other parts of the world. I'm in California. In hindsight, because I seen this thing at exactly 3 a.m. and woke up to it looking down on me, I actually considered this paranormal opposed to a cryptid spider. But I think it's amazing, unbelievable experiences regardless. I think of it quite often. Can anyone relate? Trigger warning. This story mentions child abuse. If you or someone you know is a victim or is sensitive to the topic, please skip to the last story. There will be a timestamp in the description below. I was not born with the ability to see the memory feeders. It's something that came to me when I was 5, after a beating from my maternal grandfather left me close to death. When I woke up in the hospital, I saw one of the creatures for the first time. At first, I thought it was a bird looking out at me through the air vent. It made jerky movements and twisted its head at impossible angles. Then, it flattened itself as thin as a stingray and seeped out the vent, entering my hospital room, where it flew down and landed on my grandfather's shoulder as he slept. Then it opened its mouth and stuck its long tongue into his ear. I sat there, holding my hospital blanket tight. I would have screamed, except my lips were so swollen I could barely open my mouth. And so I sat there, shaking, trying not to make a sound. When the police visited my room and asked my grandfather what had happened to me, he told them, "I don't remember," and he was telling the truth. I work in hospice care now, in a large city. We specialize in family work, and many of our clients are in their 40s and 50s. The creatures love to feed there, because the memories are fresh and whole. Over time, I've learned their habits. They prefer a taste of happy memories, weddings, births, birthdays, graduations. There are some clients that they just won't touch. The dying men with no families. With hollow eyes might as well be rotten meat to the memory eaters. I generally don't interfere with the creatures feeding on my clients, but my clients are generally too close to death that I figured they have a few memories to spare. What's the harm if a Christmas morning has been forgotten? And if I'm being honest, maybe I've been jealous because I'm rotten meat. I search and search, and all I find are bad memories. My mom's OD, my grandparents' resentment, my dad visiting dead drunk, shouting into the night. The feeders avoid me like I'm radioactive. I do try to keep the feeders away from visitors. The creatures can hardly contain themselves when children's footsteps come thumping down the hall, eager to see mom or grandma. If I'm not careful, the creatures will descend from the vents and feed on the first time Emma saw snow, or that Friday Samuel skipped school and cuddled with Mom on the couch all day. In general, a vacuum is enough to scare them off. So if I see them eyeing a child's ear, I'll head into the room and get busy, even if it interrupts a tender conversation between mother and son. Sometimes, though, the creatures cling to their victims like addicts, and I have to take more drastic action. I found that I can grab them by the wings and fling them out the window. Once or twice, I've killed them, snapping their necks, but afterwards, the stench smell of sulfur was overpowering, and it took weeks of scrubbing my hands before they felt clean. Overall, I would say we'd had an uneasy truce until last week. Last week, a teenage girl snuck in after hours. She was basically an angel in human form, star student, constantly volunteering at the local humane society. Her dad had been a beloved high school teacher until he drew the wrong card and ended up with stage 4 liver cancer, and he didn't even drink. The girl was convinced that it was her dad's last night on Earth and couldn't bear the thought of him dying without her there. So she snuck into the facility. I'm still not sure how. When I found her, she was sleeping in the chair in her dad's room, and perched on her shoulder was the biggest memory eater I'd seen. It was as big as a condor, wings stretching maybe 4 feet wide. It knelt over the girl with its worm-like tongue pushing in her ear as memories flowed down its throat. It met my eyes as it drank, and for the first time since my childhood, I was afraid of one. This was no little bird I could fling out the window. This one would fight. This one could kill me. I stood there, shaking as the creature stared at me with its black eyes, warning me that one more step would mean death. I started to back away. If I left things as they were, no one would ever know. Even the girl might go through her whole life, never realizing what happened, what she was missing. Something in me couldn't do it. No matter how much I wanted to run, I wouldn't let myself. And so I charged forward, tackling the creature off the girl. It clawed at me with its talons, ripping my shirt. It stung with invisible wounds, like I'd been lashed with invisible whips. It bit at me, too, trying to blind me with its beak. When that didn't work, it unleashed its tongue, licking at my face, its saliva burning me like acid. Holding its body off with my left hand, I reached forward with my right, grabbing the creature's tongue. Then I wrapped it around my arm, over and over, gritting my teeth as the acid seeped through my skin. As it did, I began to realize I was forgetting. My mother was the first to go. I still had the awareness of her overdose, but the details began to grow fuzzy. Once I'd remembered the exact angle of her body, some kind of smell that surrounded her, some kind of last words she'd written. Now they were all disappearing down the creature's throat. And as it ate them, it gagged, like it had eaten shit or vomit. The creature tried pulling away, but I kept holding on to its tongue. The memories all began to disappear. My grandfather's were sucked out little by little until all that remained was some vague bullet points, like they were in a movie I'd seen in my youth and then forgotten. Then my dad was gone too, and all the bullying through middle school, the dark things I'd thought about in high school too, the years lost and wandering before I finally got my shit together and made it into nursing school. The creature was weak on its feet now, barely able to stand, and finally it fell to the floor, dead and bloated. Finally, as I unleashed its tongue, a wave of tiredness washed over me, and I closed my eyes. I don't see the creatures anymore, but maybe there are things we're not meant to see. Even now I can feel the shape of them fading from my mind. I guess that's part of why I'm writing this down, in case I forget them entirely. I'm ready to forget. There's a kind of bliss in it. Ever since that night I walked the halls of hospice, and I don't feel heavy anymore. I never used to hug the grieving families, but now I do. When that teen girl's father died, I held her as close as she wept in my arms, and she kept saying, "Thank you, thank you." Had she woken up? Had she seen the fight? Or was she thanking me for something else? And in truth, I can barely remember what I've done. I live in a small town in Ireland called Evercrest. Don't try to find it. The government has taken it off the map and removed it from any records. I think they're just gonna abandon us now. Part of me thinks they always knew it was coming because our little town was always kept away from other towns in the cities in Ireland. Anyway, here's my story. I was in college, and it was mid-May when I left. I saw 3 crows pecking at something in the fields. I went over to see what it was, and found a small, white, snake-like creature, maybe about 1.5 feet in length. Except, it wasn't a snake at all. It had no arms or legs, but that's where the similarities end. It had no eyes, ears, nose, nothing. Only a mouth. A big one, too. I chased the crows away from it and lifted it up. It let out a light screech as it did. I said I'd bring him back to my dorm and show him to my science professor tomorrow, so I went to the pet store and got this snake starter kit thing and assembled it. I put it together, and he really seemed to hate the heat lamp, so I turned it off, and he seemed much happier. I decided I ought to feed him. Luckily, the starter kit came with frozen mice, so I thawed one out and gave it to him. He seemed to love it. At this point, it was midnight, so I decided to go to bed. Unfortunately, he didn't like that idea very much. Between the hours of 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., he wouldn't stop violently screaming. When I checked on him after he stopped screaming, he had grown legs, 4 of them. He was also covered in his blood. I cleaned him up and brought him to my professor. The only thing is, my professor had no idea what he was. He said, and I quote, "If there's aliens, this is one of them." Anyway, he took some blood and said he'd get my blood results for him as I was walking home. With the creature in the box, I decided I should name him. The name I landed on was Crester. When I got home, I fed him and watched TV. I let Crester sit on me on the couch. He seemed really friendly and docile now, so I had no problem doing this. After a few hours, I fed him and went to bed. Thank God that night he didn't start screaming again. When I woke up in the morning, I noticed something that scared me. His tank was smashed, and one of my windows was broken. I looked for Crester, thinking he had escaped. No. He was on the counter, sleeping, twice the size he was the night before, with blood around his mouth. He went hunting, I thought, so I put cardboard on the window. I didn't have enough money to fix it at the time after buying the snake kit thing that I'd now have to work doubles to replace. I just decided that he was friendly enough and big enough to free roam my dorm. so that's what I let him do. When I got to college, I saw the field full of dead crows. I wondered if he had done this as revenge against them, but I brushed it off. The next few days were relatively normal, with him increasing in size every day, but then one day I came back from a lecture and he was acting very aggressively, roaring at me and walking backward when I tried to approach him. He'd even whip me with his tail. I also noticed that his skin had turned to dark green color with a red stomach. I left him alone, knowing something was up with him, but then the next morning I woke up to a massive cocoon in the corner of my kitchen, huge enough for at least 2 or 3 adult humans to fit inside. I left the dorm quickly and went to work. When I got back that evening, the cocoon was shaking and making noise. Later that night, it broke in two, and out walked Crester on 2 legs. He had gone back to his white color and was now 7 feet tall with very long arms compared to his body. He walked towards me, slowly, cornering me in, growled at me, and bared his teeth. I had never been so scared. I thought he would kill me, but then he hopped out of my window and left, breaking it in the process. I went to the bar to try and forget about the whole thing, as I was utterly traumatized. The next day, I got to my college and saw crowds of students crowding around crime scene tape, as my science professor was wheeled out in a bag. Apparently someone attacked him, ripped him apart. They say it was like someone he had a debt to, but I know it was Crester getting revenge for the blood test. A few missing persons reports later, there is a meeting about it in the town hall. When the police start talking about suspects, Crester bursts in and starts attacking people. The rest is kind of a blur, but I remember screams. Now I'm hiding behind a desk in the town hall. There are bodies and blood everywhere, and Crester is still here looking for people. I think he knows I'm here. If someone can help, please.